draft coverage, I think, began about 20 years ago as a big extravaganza hosted tonight by my good friend who returns here on the Rich Eisen Show, Rece Davis. How are you, Rece?
I'm doing great, Rich. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. First order of business, is it Ben Simmons for sure? I mean, is this in the same way that prior to the NFL draft, it was all Jared Goff, even though there might be a 1% chance it would be different?
Yes, it's Ben Simmons. The Sixers looked at Brandon Ingram, I think, for a while, and then ultimately decided they couldn't pass on Ben Simmons, who basically is a prototype in terms of skill set, with the exception of his shooting still needs to come along. The question about him, Rich, is he a guy who's going to make others, turn others into winners? They won some at LSU but didn't even get into the tournament. He's going to be the first guy that will be the number one overall pick coming out of a college program who didn't lead his team to the NCAA tournament since the field has been larger than 32. You know, there were some guys back in the day, handful of guys, who didn't play in the tournament when, only conference champions were allowed to play or whatever. But he'll be the first, and I think that really is the main question about Ben Simmons going number one.
Would it be smoke or fire, the story that he doesn't want to be drafted by the Sixers?
I think for a while that there was a little fire to it, but as you probably know, and he posted on Instagram, he went there, he worked out. He posted a picture of himself in Philadelphia workout gear. I sort of think, Rich, that ultimately what that was he didn't want to be, or his people didn't want it to appear that he was auditioning for it. He wanted to probably some type of guarantee. He believed he was the best player in the draft, and he wanted to be treated as such. And ultimately, I think that was more of what that was about, rather than not wanting to go to Philadelphia. Because I think the management in Philadelphia is in a better place right now with Brian Colangelo, and now rather than I've made the joke, they have a Rocky statue in Philadelphia, but they were probably going to replace it with a Roberto Duran statue for the Sixers fans. They've been no mas, for the last few years, but now it appears they're ready to fight back, and they're even trying to make a move to move one of their young big guys and get the number 3 pick in addition to Simmons, and get the number 3 pick from Boston.
Well, maybe it should be a Michael B. Jordan statue, Rece, because they don't know who Rocky is with the median age of this team right now, right? I mean, they have no idea what we're talking about with Rocky. And that's part of the issue with Simmons, too, is that with all the other kids that they have here, he lowers the median age on this team, Rece.
It's a concern, and I don't think that Okafor showed the maturity that they had hoped for. They're very excited that Joel Embiid has finally been cleared to play, but with the history of foot problems that he has, and from my experience with him, and most of that coming during his brief time at Kansas, I think that Embiid is a mature guy, albeit a young guy, and I think that him being back will certainly help them if he can stay healthy. But there's no question that they could use some veterans as well. But it appears that their focus right now is getting Simmons, and if all of the reports that our people, Mark Stein, Chad Ford, have been on top of right now, they're trying to move one of those guys to the Celtics and get that number 3 pick to pair another guy with him. I would assume, although I don't know, that would be Chris Dunn. The guard from Providence is what they would go with at number 3. That's what I would do if I were in their shoes.
Rece Davis joining me here on the Rich Eisen Show. Why isn't Buddy Hield getting more heat here? That's the way I started the show, based on what back in the day. Again, maybe I'm just an old school guy. That's the guy that would be number 1 overall. They don't want to take these young kids who might not know their elbow from another body part. They want to take somebody who's seasoned and can shoot in this league. Where's Buddy Hield in this whole equation coming into tonight?
It's an interesting question. I think that a couple of things probably work against him. One is that just what you touched on. He's an older guy. I think Buddy's 23, or will be by the time the season starts, and at least by their standards, they feel like that maybe what you see is what you get. I'm of the opinion that Buddy has improved every year at Oklahoma, and he's added a facet to his game every year that he's been at Oklahoma. Now, is he a top 3 franchise guy? I'm not sure he's a good enough ball handler and creator. I think he still strikes me as a little bit more of a specialist in the league. I don't think he's I don't think he's like Steph Curry, because I don't think he creates the way Steph does. But He does have some length to him. He can get off the floor. He's a good athlete. I think he has the tools to be a good defender. But I don't think he's quite the creator and doesn't have quite as many components to his game as a guy who might be a transcendent force like Curry or someone else of similar size.
So let's throw the Celtics out of the mix here for the moment because they're a playoff team from last year. I'm looking at Minnesota sitting there at 5. And if they can get somebody, let's just say like Buddy, right?
Yeah.
Or somebody of that ilk, are people talking about this team in the manner that I'm thinking about them, which is they are maybe ready to roll with Thibodeau and can be a force in a way next year in the Western Conference?
I think so. I agree with you. I think that they probably need, whether it's a starter or someone off the bench. Garnett, I know, filled that role to some degree this past year, but they need a veteran to kind of show them how to win. But I tend to agree with you. I think Buddy would be terrific there. I actually think, and I keep going back to the guy, and it's not that I think he's going to be, a big superstar in the league, but he's got so many different skills. I think because of Thibodeau that Chris Dunn would be really, really good if he fell to that place. Like Buddy, he's an older guy. He's a fourth-year junior. That's a rarity in this draft, too, because he had to redshirt 1 year with injuries to his shoulders. He's an older guy, excellent defender, rebounds and passes very, very well. I think he would be a great fit for them if he somehow slipped there. Buddy, I also think, would be a great fit. For some reason, a lot of the projections, Rich, that I've seen from Chad Ford and some of our other guys have Jamal Murray, who I think is even more of a specialist than Hield would be, going there. I think Hield has more potential as a defensive player, which to me would fit the mold at
Thibodeau.
Minnesota a little bit better with Thibodeau than maybe Jamal Murray would.
Sure. And before the NFL draft, Rece, I asked some of my analyst compadres, where would Goff and Wentz rank if they were thrown in the mix with Mariota and Winston from the year before? What about these guys compared to Karl Anthony Towns, D'Angelo Russell, Porzingis, et cetera? What are people saying about this year's class in relation to last year's?
I think it's a two-person class, and I think that Simmons, maybe not over Towns by the end. Now, before last year started, before Karl Anthony Towns' freshman year at Kentucky, I think the consensus was at that time that Ben Simmons still would have been the number one pick had he been able to come out the same year that Towns did. After they both played a year in college, I still tend to think that Towns would have been one, but I believe Simmons would have been two. Ingram probably would have been in the mix. So I think that with those two guys, that they would still, be top 3 or 4. It's sort of some of the other guys below where you have, at least in the perception, in the minds of many of the scouts, you have a little bit of a drop-off to a couple of different tiers after the Simmons-Ingram duo, who would fit in very well with the guys from last year, Towns and Okafor, et cetera.
What are you hearing there in Brooklyn from folks about the Rose to the Knicks trade? How's that hitting the scene?
Cautious optimism. I think that they believe now that it gives the Knicks some hope and something to sell with Porzingis being better than expected quicker. Not necessarily, in terms of finished product, but I'm not sure they expected him to be as good as he was this past year. Still got Carmelo. Now you've got Derrick Rose, who played better later in the season as things went along. And, he and Jimmy Butler had a difficult time coinciding on the floor. So I think there's some hope, maybe, that while acknowledging that Rose is not going to be the player he was when he was an MVP, that he still can be really good, and then it gives them three pieces, and maybe allows him to attract even another player in free agency or via another trade or something. So I think there's real reason for hope for the Knicks after, even though they don't have a pick in the draft, they might have made the biggest news of all in terms of getting Derrick Rose and adding a little more optimism after the Porzingis deal from a year ago.
Well, I think we're going to celebrate my current 8-year-old's bar mitzvah with the Knicks' next draft pick, I think, if I'm not mistaken, thanks to the previous administrations.
Yeah, it's really funny. A lot of these teams don't want the draft picks right now. I think it's 4 teams that will control 40% of the first round in terms of having a total of 12 picks. And There was an interesting stat when I did the draft a couple of years ago that the Mavericks hadn't kept their first-round pick, and I want to say it was like 6 or 7 years. And I think a lot of, once you get beyond slam dunk franchise-type players, if those even exist, and honestly, Rich, I have my questions as to whether either of these two guys this year are that. If you're talking, lead a franchise to multiple championships type guys, I'm not sure either of those guys are that some of the GMs would rather try to make some deals in free agency, get proven commodities. Salary cap is going to skyrocket this year and then go up again next year. They're going to have a lot of money, not only that they can spend, but a lot of teams are going to have to spend a lot of money just to get to the floor, or else the rest of the money will be distributed among the players they have. So the teams are going to have to make moves, and a lot of them are inclined to see if they can pry away veterans from other teams. The flip side of that is if a team has a veteran and they know what they're going to pay him and they know what they're going to get, they are reluctant to let those assets go.
Lastly, has the NBA told you and other folks who have I guess contracts with them no tweeting? Let Adam Silver make the announcement. Has that directive been given by the NBA?
No, not in that way. I think at least not to us. Here's our philosophy on it, Rich. The guys who are doing the reporting for their own individual Twitter accounts, if they dig up and unearth news that is verifiable from traditional sources and they tweet it out, that's on them. For us, we still think that there is some value in presenting the show, as you guys do, and making it entertaining for the people who are watching. We'll wait on Commissioner Silver. Now, that doesn't mean we'll bury news if it happens, but in terms of that 5-minute span and getting the picks, if somebody tweets it out, 45 seconds before he goes to the podium, we're not going to get in a tizzy and try to jump him on that.
Rece, you're the man. Thanks for calling in. Have a great time tonight, 7 Eastern time on ESPN with you, Jalen Rose, Wilbon, and Billis. Look forward to it.
Thanks, Rich. Great talking to you.
You bet. That's Rece Davis.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern on Audience.